Back when this channel first got started, believe it or not, the main complaint I heard in relation to the actual political theory, the real hard political science content that I'm presenting here, was that I was dividing the community. And this is, I mean, it's an interesting perception of what I'm doing and the consequences. I do actually agree to some extent, because whenever we switch from a discussion of political problems to political solutions, things get divisive quick. In fact, I would go so far as to say that in principle, in the context of organization, activism, running a movement, problems unify people, whereas solutions divide them. Paradoxical as it may seem, that's how it is. Give you an example. You could form a political movement simply based around protesting against coal power. And you'd unify all kinds of people from all kinds of different political perspectives. And the only thing they have to have in common is the idea that coal power is bad, and they want to get it on the streets and get on the TV news, use whatever means are available to them to shape public perception of coal power as a problem and to raise coal power as a political priority, right? The idea that we should reduce or eliminate reliance on coal-burning power plants, okay? So that can unify all kinds of people. But you're only basing your movement on the declaration of the problem. Think about how profoundly different the whole process is, and who the people are who will join, how they relate to each other, and who will donate money and who won't. Think about how profoundly different it is if instead, from day one, your foundation is defined as promoting nuclear power to replace coal power. That coal power should be phased out and replaced with nuclear power plants. Divisive. When you just base your movement on declaring the problem, on complaining about the problem, basically, that unites people. And when you build your movement around a solution, it divides people. Solutions are divisive, all right? And I would say this is even true. I'm going to pick now, I think, the least politically divisive example I can think of, and yet it still is in this fundamental way divisive. Let's say I move back to Canada, I'm living in Victoria, BC, and I decide, you know what, I think it's really important for me as a vegan to start a small foundation, small charity, and for us to have 4 vegan hot dog stands so that there's a vegan option at 4 crucial points in the city, at the bus station downtown, at the harbor, you know what I mean? The few places, Victoria doesn't have a subway system. You know what? I really want to get this together, and we're going to employ some university students to be part-time selling these vegan hot dogs or vegan hamburgers, whatever they are. This is what the foundation is going to do. Okay? Now, that's not controversial. That's not like taking a stand on vivisection or taking a stand on feeding cats, cat food, or even leather shoes or fur coats. This is the least divisive example I can think of. But from day one, that will divide people, and it will, in effect, discipline your whole organization. Who gets engaged, how they get engaged, and so on, right? So there are going to be some people, and they're going to tell you to your face angrily, they're going to say, hey, this isn't real vegan activism. They're going to say, I don't support this. This isn't my idea of activism. There are people going to say to you, no, their idea of vegan activism is going to Parliament and screaming, holding a placard, or taking off their clothes, being naked in a public square, and putting fake blood all over themselves and pretending to be a slaughtered animal. You know, they're gonna tell you. That's the culture I come from. Canadians are not mousy about that kind of thing. People are going to tell you to your face, this isn't legit activism. And if you do it as a foundation, if you're incorporated as a nonprofit of some kind, as a charity, there are people who are going to tell you they don't think that's a legitimate charity. They don't think that selling vegan hot dogs to promote veganism is a legitimate thing to donate money. People are going to tell you. You are going to hear it, right? But this is a solution, however humble, where you're starting off by saying, look, one reason why people aren't vegan or why vegans struggle to maintain their veganism is exactly that they don't have a vegan option when they get off the bus at the bus station, right? And a few other crucial points. And there are hot dogs and pizza and everything, but nothing is vegan. And of course, also implicitly, this is just promoting veganism itself. You can sell these hot dogs or hamburgers and have a leaflet, in the container with it or what have you. And hey, you know what? It's divisive in other ways. I mean, probably some vegans are going to scream at you because you're selling hot dogs in a disposable styrofoam container. They're going to say, hey, this is not bad for ecology. And they're going to scream at you and tell you you're giving veganism a bad name. So even this example, which is the least political I can think of, is divisive because it starts with a solution. It's centered on a solution, right? And in this case, it's a solution that we can put into practice the day after tomorrow, immediately. It's not very, very far distance. Okay, so I'm making this video partly in response to 2 messages I just got from 2 Patreon supporters. Thank you guys very much. I'm happy to hear from you, of course. And they pay. They pay for the privilege to have me read whatever email they're sending me here within Patreon. So one is a guy called Nicholas, whom I have replied to many times before, and Nicholas is writing to me about how depressing it is to try to organize real and meaningful vegan activism on a university campus. I think there's a big misconception that somehow universities are laboratories of ideas where veganism is easier and more effective, and that they're natural. The reality is that in many ways, activism on a campus is uniquely bleak, depressing, and dead-ended, partly because you're working with people who are only going to be there for 2 years and then they're gone, right? There's no sense of permanent commitment to that place. The vast majority of students, maybe they get interested in veganism in their 2nd or 3rd year, and then they finish the diploma and then they're gone. So it's quite an unnatural institutional context. And it's also the case that you're not really living in a real city or a real town or even a real business. You're living in an artificial pseudo-city created by the university itself, which is a for-profit machine controlled by corporate interests. So, I mean, he's talking about Nicholas is writing to me talking about how depressing it is to hand out pamphlets and hold short discussions, trying to promote a Meatless Monday campaign, which is backed by Chartwells. Chartwells is a for-profit corporation that has a contract with the university to exclusively provide food. And he says, telling students, eat more from this one place in the campus center with mediocre meatless options only on Mondays, in the hope that Chartwells will notice that there's money in healthy food, is quite depressing and half-assed, as you can imagine, close quote. Anyway, I may have to make another video responding to Nicholas's concerns, but Nick, I mean, he ends this by saying, I really appreciate you communicating with me because I see myself as reaching around in the dark. Yeah, I mean, I hear you and I feel you, man. These questions that I talk about on my channel, some of you watching this may think that this is political theory for the sake of theory. It's not. This stuff is not very far removed from our real lives and, practical decisions that people like Nicholas have to make. And almost every idea I've talked about on this channel that started maybe with a theoretical discussion now is a real part of my life as an aspiring vegan political activist, right? Like, the idea of doing a vegan children's storybook was talked about a couple years ago, I forget, more than a year ago on this channel, and now it's a real part of my life. I've written this story, I have an illustrator, it's been translated into many languages, so as one form of vegan activism that's compatible with my circumstances, I'm writing and illustrating and publishing a children's storybook. Sorry, I'm not the illustrator, but I've written a contract with a professional illustrator. So we're pursuing that as a project. This is not, this is not pie in the sky, unattainable ideology we're talking about here. And even an example like running a hot dog stand, I was really talking to my girlfriend about that. We're saying, look, in the future, choosing where we're going to live, this city versus that city, ideas like that of actually being in food services, those are still a meaningful part of my life. And we talk about them as things we may really try to do in the future. So, and my own education situation, be a long conversation. But I've looked at everything. And when I say looked at, I've gotten on the phone with university directors, heads of departments, and I've looked at applying for everything from entering culinary college to become a vegan chef or learn how to run and manage a restaurant, as a form of activism for the cause, for the movement, over to, dietetics and nutrition, getting a diploma in that, becoming a formally registered dietitian. Just a couple of weeks ago, my girlfriend and I were talking about that in depth, you know. And I mean, now one outstanding option for me would be getting a degree in something like public administration. Public administration means bureaucracy. But if you actually want to run a foundation, a nonprofit linked to veganism, ecology, etc., having that kind of expertise could be very valuable. So all these things, for me, they're not theoretical discussions. Put it this way, they're theories that intersect with decisions I make in my real life in a very meaningful way. And I think the main difference between me and most of my audience is just that during these few years when I've been on YouTube, my own life has been so malleable and so rootless, where I didn't know where I was going to be living 6 months in the future. And I didn't know even what I was going to be studying at university. So even though I was in the university already, I was looking at, okay, I'm going to change my major to this, going to change my major to that. So I've been at a crossroads over such a long period of time that, again, that's why there's, I think, so much theoretical discussion on this channel. And I mean, again, I do get questions from people like Nicholas who are really asking for advice and guidance on how they can take these ideas and be more effective and do more meaningful activism in their own lives. And I value that. You know, it's wonderful to get that kind of email, okay? But on the other hand, the vast majority of my audience never ask those questions because they already have a job, they have a career, or they're enrolled in a full-time program of education, and they know exactly how few options they've got, right? Like they know they're stuck living in Pittsburgh. I think I have 3 Patreon supporters from Pittsburgh. Shout out to you guys. They're living in Pittsburgh. This is the job they do 5 days a week. This is how much time they have. These are the local organizations that exist, and they can look at option A or option B, and if they don't like them, then there's a huge step up in commitment and time and energy to creating your own option C, right? So a lot of people feel very, very limited, and they're already familiar with the options they've got, so they're not asking me what their options are. They already know, right? And, of course, there are advantages and disadvantages to being in that kind of situation. When you talk to somebody like a medical doctor, you know, who's vegan or supports veganism, you might think, wow, you're a medical doctor. You're in this fantastic position to really do something meaningful for veganism as an activist. But then you hear it from their perspective, and they feel that they have absolutely no scope to do anything. They're so pinned down by their job and by their other commitments in life, they feel they have absolutely no scope to change the world, no scope to even change their own schedule. So I also, in response to my earlier video, I got this question from Olivia. Olivia says she empathizes with what I'm saying in my critique of pamphleting and my critique of attention-seeking protests. She understands what I'm saying about the importance of solution-based activism versus problem-based activism, right? However, she complains that I was too vapid and too fleeting in stating what I really believe the solution to the problem is, okay? If it is not protesting or pamphleting, then what? You have spoken about lobbying and working collaboratively with special interest groups in the past, but instead of talking about the problems of the movement today in the past 5 years, care to elaborate specifically about the steps, stages, processes that need to be taken in the future and why you believe these to be effective. Okay, Olivia, great question. Look, I have over 500 videos on this channel. I have more than 20 hours of discussion of exactly this issue, so I can allude to that in brief, but I'm not going to dodge the question. I am going to give you a new answer now. There are 2 scales, thinking small and thinking big, okay? You're wrong when I say I didn't mention the solution. I mentioned who the winners are. The winners are PCRM. And what did PCRM do? Lawsuits. Okay? You may be watching this video in Sweden or Iceland or England or Japan. I do have a couple of viewers from Japan. Shout out to them. Why not? Why not do exactly what PCRM already did? Not in the same topic. Maybe your focus isn't dietary science. Maybe it isn't nutrition guidelines. Why can't you take the government to court? Why can't you have your own lawsuit? Why can't you put together a foundation that successful, that influential, that respected, that important? You can. You can sit down today and make a flowchart of the steps of exactly what you need to accomplish that over the next 20 years. Okay? They ain't got nothing you ain't got. Right? Doesn't take a genius. Doesn't take millions of dollars. It'll take a ton of hard work. But for you in your lane, you can be the next PCRM. And of course, what you do will be completely different. Maybe you're going to be the PCRM of leather. It's mind-blowing how terrible leather is. Leather, it's not just terrible in terms of the cruelty to animals, the environmental impacts, even the human rights and human health impacts, chromium hexane, the impacts for the workers. Maybe you can put together a foundation that's just as good as PCRM and has the same methods, launching lawsuits, scientifically valid publications. Maybe you can be the equivalent to PCRM tackling the leather issue. Okay? Please, somebody now, take that idea from me. Take it and run. We don't need one PCRM. We need 20 PCRMs. And we need a group like PCRM in Japan and in Iceland and in England and in Sweden, right? We need it in Canada. Okay? So yes, I did give positive examples like PCRM, Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, right? But are we thinking big or are we thinking small? I was talking to my girlfriend not too long ago about the possibility that she and I together could go back to university and become formally accredited as dietitians. And one of the things I said in conclusion, it was a long conversation, but I said, look, you know what the problem is? This is thinking small. And the bottleneck is not that we don't have enough dietitians who support veganism on planet Earth. The problem is those dietitians need a charitable foundation or even a business that will go to bat for them and will enable them to do the kind of work they really aspire to do. We have all these vegan dietitians, but they're stuck in a dead-end job where they feel they have a conflict of interest, where they work in a crummy hospital or a retirement home, and they can't teach, preach, practice the kind of nutritional science that they both believe in ethically and they know they can back up with current science-based medical facts. So, the bottleneck is actually that those people need an employer. They need basically an agency that can enable them to do the jobs they passionately want to do, and so they can get out from under the thumb of, the usual employers that control them. So you're thinking big, start that foundation. Okay? If you want the way forward, yes. So those are two great examples. I've had other examples thinking big. Where do vegans go on vacation? Absolutely, we need vegans working in tourism. Where do vegans retire in terms of retirement homes? All the talking I've done about cycle of life. Big ideas, big scale, long term. And then the flip side of that is, if we're talking small scale, small amounts of money, short amounts of time, then that's exactly the stuff I've already been talking about earlier in this video. That can be a vegan hot dog stand. That can be a vegan pancake stand. That can be publishing a children's book, right? Which is exactly the stuff I'm doing because of the limits in my own life, okay? So I do believe I've set out for you positive next steps for the movement on both a grandiose scale and on a small scale. But here's the real benefit. Once you engage in that sort of political process, you find out who you can work with and you find out who you can't. You build the friendships, you build the connections that really are the basis for a movement and are going to be the basis for meaningful relationships until the day you die. And sadly, you're also going to probably make some enemies and you're going to work with some people and you figure out after a short period of time you can't work with this guy at all, etc., etc. Long, boring videos have just been posted by Anna Scanlon. Anna Scanlon has a lawsuit and she brought another person in to get involved with the lawsuit, and then this person really ended up disrupting her lawsuit in a really negative way. I'm not going to tell the story. The details are not worth knowing. Okay? Now, the moral of that story from my perspective, this is Anna Scanlon bringing Renee into her lawsuit and she ends up having to kick her out of the lawsuit. Okay. There's an old saying, I think it's in French. I think this is an old saying in French. You never really know somebody until you have to share an inheritance with them. If you're talking about a legal dispute, if you're talking about the level of commitment and cooperation that any of these ideas, big or small, entail, running a hot dog stand, running a foundation like PCRM, the level of trust, reliance on others, level of mutual respect that's involved is tremendously high. And that's really much more important than the money, right? Feeling that you're working with other people you respect and they respect you. You're not wasting their time. They're not, that's the most precious thing of all. And in the process, whether the project you do is tiny or huge, that's where you find out who you really can work with and who you can't. And in some ways, you even find out who you really are, what you're capable of, what your limits are. Okay? So that sense of proving yourself, that's the one value here we can never really quantify. And that, I think that's why we need both big steps and small. That's why so many of my own hopes for the future of veganism hang on these seemingly absurd examples. Because if you don't do that, if you don't step away from, this self-defeating pattern of, on the one hand, grandiose and narcissistic YouTube videos, and on the other hand, vengeful, angry Facebook comments. That's how most vegans, that's what they consider activism. You know what I mean? Education and outreach. Through, on the one hand, lifestyle videos, and on the other hand, the kind of perpetual war of worlds in this digital demi-monde we've created. That will never have this process of where you prove who you are to others and where others prove who they are to you, and you find out who you really can trust enough to co-sign on a lawsuit with. In building a foundation, ultimately, you're building relationships with maybe 5 or 10 people. That's the human resources element of it. And that's the crucial next step we all need to take for veganism on a larger scale to move forward. Say again, problems tend to unify people. Solutions tend to divide people. When you switch to solution-based organization, activism, etc., you're going to find out that everything is way more divisive than you thought it was. But that divisiveness itself, you can come to value as a positive thing because it disciplines your movement and organization, gives it a clear sense of purpose.